Hello amphibian lovers, it's AmphibianBoss here, and today I just wanted to talk about how to care for Indonesian floating frogs. Also in the stores they're called spotted floating frogs, Chinese floating frogs, all these different names, but I like to call them Indonesian floating frogs because they come from Indonesia as said in their name. So let's get started. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is housing. I would say the minimum size for 2 to 3 frogs would be a 5-gallon. These frogs don't use a lot of space and they don't roam a lot. As you can see with the setup that I have, it's all water and there's a lot of plants. That's the best setup for this frog. I just like having lots of water for them to float on, and they don't like roam a lot. Like I said, they just kind of sit around and float. And usually they kind of scoot underneath the water to hide. So I would say 5 gallons for 2 to 3 frogs, and you could go up from there and you could have a 10-gallon with I don't know, you could have a 10-gallon with 20 frogs in it. That'd be crazy, but that'd be awesome at the same time because these frogs are pretty cool. So I would have it semi-aquatic, pretty close, most like 3/4 water and 1/4 land usually. You don't even have to have a landmass, usually just like a turtle dock or some kind of area that they can kind of rest on, like plants. They don't really get out of the water unless you actually have a sloping land for them, but they don't need to. I like to have this set up where there's a lot of vines. There's plants coming out of the water and there's plants going into the water, so they can hold on to the plants while they're floating in the water. And also when I'm feeding them crickets and other insects that like to crawl across the plants and stuff, it gives them some foliage to hang on. As you might have seen, my frog kind of scooted off there. He kind of gets scared when I'm around. That's one of the things with these frogs, they get spooked really easily. So having plants around is a great idea for your insects and your frog to rest on. Also having a little dry area like that pot and that dish there, I just put some mealworms and the crickets on there, and the mealworms just kind of get eaten off of there by the frog. They don't mind filters either. Filtration I would recommend. Also when you're using decor such as rocks and stuff, you don't have to. I would suggest having a bare bottom if it was me. Actually, I actually have gravel because I do have gravel just laying around, and it makes the tank look nicer. They're not the messiest frogs, but with most amphibians it's better to have a bare bottom. I would suggest having a filter. They like having heat, so filter to warm up the water just a little bit will help, and having filtration in that tank is going to keep it nice and clean. And they don't mind a lot of current. Like, if you have tons of current, like if you had a power head in your tank, I wouldn't suggest that. But as you can see, I have a Repti filter that can take about 25 gallons, I think, 20 to 25 gallons. It works great in a 10-gallon, even in 5 gallons if you put a little rock underneath of it, and it's just like a little waterfall. And he likes this tank. Yeah, and if you want to have gravel, I'd say about 3 inches of gravel for your setup. But usually I wouldn't even recommend having any gravel at all. And back to housing. A lot of the times I see on Frog Forum and other forums, people say, what amphibian or reptile I can keep in a 5-gallon tank? People say nothing. Well, there's actually a lot you can put in a 5-gallon tank. Newts and other things. This is one of those things you can put in a 5-gallon they don't mention at all. But one of the things is, these things aren't available at stores very often, so it's kind of hard to find them. But if you can find them, you can put them in a 5-gallon tank, and they're great little frogs to have. Okay, now to feeding. You can feed these frogs any insects like small crickets and smaller food choices, because these frogs only get about an inch long and they're not very big. Even if you think they can eat them, it might not fit in their stomach, because I've seen them eat too big of mealworms, and it kind of like looks like it's gonna burst right out of its stomach, because you can kind of see the insect wedged inside their stomach. So try to keep your mealworms a little bit smaller. You can feed them small wax worms, something called black worms I heard, but I don't even know what they look like. Small crickets, all your little insects, just feed them to them. I think they may eat fish and other things, but I'm not 100% sure. But I usually just feed them mealworms, earthworms, and small crickets, and keep your food choices very varied. They also really like to eat bloodworms. Bloodworms are great for another choice of worms. You can also feed them live bloodworms or the frozen thawed bloodworms. Frozen thawed are pretty easy. They'll eat live or dead insect items such as like the Zoomed's Canos food. You can feed them the canned crickets and canned mealworms. And you know, I wouldn't suggest freeze-dried bloodworms because I'm not really a fan of those unless you're feeding them the fish. Those work great. And calcium dust, even if you're doing a big variety, I would still suggest having some calcium around just to dust your crickets and mealworms and other things once in a while. So I just wanted to show you my food items. I keep small crickets in here. I don't know if there's any in there. There probably are, but they're probably hiding up in the tubes. I feed them those, and I also feed the mealworms here. Best way to keep mealworms is in this kind of setup here. I just keep pull out, you know, smaller mealworm instead of some of the bigger ones, and just put one on the dock to feed them. I just wanted to show you my food items. I pull out some frozen thaw bloodworms, but they're in the freezer right now, so if you haven't seen them before, it's just a cube of bloodworms. Temperature and lighting. Now I'm actually going to take my phone out of this little makeshift tripod here. As you can see, when I was pausing the video, the tripod was kind of like moving, or my phone was moving. That's because it's just a little stand like this. It's just a little stand, so it's not the best, but I'm going to be getting a setup for that. So heating and lighting and such, it's about 80 in there on the thermometer. I would suggest having a thermometer. Thermometers are great to have just to tell if it's too cold or too warm. So keeping it at 80 just has this this heat mat, Zoomed's 5-gallon heat mat on the side there, and I just hockey taped it on because the stickiness isn't working very good. But that keeps the heat up nice, and I believe the water is being heated a little bit by a filter. As you know, friction in the filter and little motors working will cause a little bit of heat in the water, but not a lot. As you can also see, I have lighting here, but that's just for the video purpose. I usually don't have lighting, and they're good without lighting, but it's in kind of the view of the window just a little bit, like it's closer to the window, but not right in the window to so it won't cause a lot of algae. So during the day you can still view, but it's a lot easier to view when you have a light on top. And this is just a fluorescent light. I would suggest having a heating bulb just to, if you're going to have a light, having heating bulb or a heat mat just to keep the heat up. The temperatures, I like to keep it at 75 to 80 degrees. That's a perfect temperature for these frogs. I'm just going to adjust the camera here. About 75 to 85 degrees. It's about 80 in there, and that's right in the middle. That's perfect for them. The water should be around the same, but I would say the air should be about 80 degrees and the water should be about 75, and I think that's where around what the temperature is in there. Compatibility. People don't really talk about compatibility a lot with amphibians, and I would not suggest keeping these frogs with anything else. I wouldn't suggest keeping a lot of amphibians together because there are fighting and other consequences in that. But if you can find any amphibians, I'm not sure any reptiles or anything that live in Indonesia, same climate as these guys, I would say sure. You could probably keep smaller reptiles and things in a polidarium kind of setup in your room or wherever you keep them. I would suggest having it bigger if you're going to have other animals with them. I guess you could keep door frogs with them and other little you know, like little newts or salamanders that like a little bit of a warmer climate. But again, I wouldn't suggest keeping tree frogs. You could keep tree frogs with them too if you had a taller tank. That would work too. And you can also keep them with fish. I would say you could keep them with fish, sure. Most people have them in an aquarium with their fish, and they have them on top with just a little dock and stuff. So actually, these are great. If you have an aquarium and you're looking for something different other than fish to put in your aquarium, there's a frog that you can put in your aquarium. As you can see, he's kind of stretching out there right by the pot, but I do not want to scare him because he does not like it when I scare him. Yeah, you can just keep them with small reptiles, amphibians, and I would suggest having them with fish as long as the fish don't eat them. Some tips and some things to watch for. I'm going to put this in this video because I wrote it out before a while ago, and there's some things you're going to have to watch. These guys can jump really high and very, very quickly if you have a land area. Let's say you had a semi-aquatic land area and you stuck your hand in to get them. They're very, very hard to catch and they usually jump out. I'm pretty sure I lost one because my grandpa like stuck his hand in to take the put the filter cord or something in there when we were measuring to make this lid, and I think one actually jumped out, so I only have one left, which is kind of unfortunate. I'm hoping to get one more or two more because that'd be kind of cool for my room to have. So they do jump very high in shallow water. If you have deep water, usually they can't jump very high, and very fast and very unpredictable. So I would suggest having a tight lid on top. They can't lift the lids or anything, but I would suggest having a lid on top, even if you have cats or dogs or anything that could eat them, but they can jump out. So I would suggest having a lid and having a pretty high tank. Don't keep them, if you keep them in bins or anything, I guess that's okay. When I first got these two guys, I didn't have a tank at the moment for them, so I kept them in a small bin. That's okay. I would suggest having some height so they can't jump out when you're trying to get them. And when you're pulling them out of the tank to clean, I would not suggest handling them at all. No exceptions for that. But when you're pulling them out to put them in a separate container so you can clean the tank out, use a net. I actually have a net here. This net. I bought it for about $2. It's just a bigger net to scoop them up for larger fish, and it's the netting's a little bit softer. I like having a net for these guys and other amphibians because they can be slippery and hard to catch, so having a net is a good idea. Also watch for food impaction when they're eating larger food items. Like I said, that's not good, especially if you have a larger mealworm that crawls and like pushes out its stomach. Of course, it's going to kill them. They like to hide, and I usually know where they are, especially in my tank. It's harder for them to hide. But if you have lots of hiding places and such, this guy doesn't like to hide as much, but I've had others in the past that have just hid behind the filter, and you'll never know they're there. So don't panic if you can't find your frog at all. I know a lot of people panic when they can't find something in a tank, but trust me, they're probably there if you have a good lid. Usually they're not going to jump out, and unless they're dead, that kind of sucks. But they have very good camouflage. I will post a picture at the end of this video that you guys can look at, just so you know what they look like, because they're very, very hard to view in the tank, and I can't pull them out for you, so sorry about that. But I'll put a picture of one at the very end. And they have, yeah, like I said, they have great camo, and if you have them against brown coloring or in the gravel and stuff, you won't be able to find them. But that's kind of their defense mechanism. Since they're so small, they're not going to really be able to protect themselves, so when they hide, they can do that. So like I said, I was just going to show a couple pictures of what these frogs look like, just so you guys can see what they look like in the stores and you guys can pick one up. I'd like to thank you guys so much for watching, and peace.